In the last section, we started talking about update operators. Specifically, the one that we want to use is the inc or increment modifier. The purpose of this modifier is to send an instruction off to our database, and Mongo will be 100% responsible for updating a big set of records for us. So again, anytime you want to update a bunch of records, you are going to want to start to look for your update operators. So let's fill in our test and make use of this update operator. I'm inside of my update test file, and I'm in the test specifically for incrementing a post count by 1. So inside of here, we're going to end up using the update function, much like we saw earlier. So here's a model class can update. We said find all the models, or all the records with the name of Joe, set their name to Alex. So we're going to use a very similar syntax this time around. Inside of the it statement, I will add an assert, or excuse me, we're not going to do an assert name this time around. We're going to have to write our own little assertion ourselves. We'll say user.update, and then we want to find every user with the name of Joe. And we specifically want to set an update operator. So I'm going to add in another object here. We're going to specify the update increment operator with $inc. And then we'll say, I want to find the post count property on every object that is found by this criteria right here. And I want to update it by 1 or increment it by 1. So this is it. This is how we use these update operators. We specify the type of operator that we want to use. Then we point it at an object with the key of the property that we increment or we want to increment, and then the amount that we want to increment it by. You will notice that the documentation that we were just looking at, there is no dec operator or like decrement operator. And if you kind of think about it for a little bit, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. There's no decrement operator because we can increment by a negative value and achieve the same effect. So if you ever want to decrement a bunch of records in one go, you can still use increment, but just pass in a negative value here. Okay, so I think that this will go ahead and do the update for us. Now we have to think about what type of test we're going to write in here. So like that, at the start or just a moment ago, I made a mistake and I was about to say, well, yeah, we'll use assert name again. This time around, we're not going to use assert name because we are incrementing a post count value, and we're probably going to want to write an assertion around looking at the value of the post count as opposed to looking at the name, which is what, of course, assert name does. So instead, I think that we'll go through the similar practice as we've done twice now. I'm going to chain on a .then. Inside of here, we'll add in a query to pull our Joe model, or a user with the name of Joe, out of our collection, and then we'll make an assertion about Joe's current post count. So inside of here, I'll add in a query to find one user with the name of Joe. So notice that we have not changed Joe's name in any way, shape, or form. We've just incremented the post count property. So after we find the user with the name of Joe, we can take that user and we will assert that user.postCount is equal to 1 now. Note that we could not just look at Joe inside of here. When we use the find one, find one right here has no idea, no clue that we have a variable or a model instance inside of this test file called Joe. Okay, so just to be 100% clear, just because we are fetching this record out of our database, it's not going to magically update Joe for us. So I could not do assert Joe.postCount right here because Joe is not getting updated. Joe is our server side or JavaScript side representation, which is not getting magically updated. Okay, and then after that, after we assert the post count, we'll make sure that we close off with our callback of done. And again, I'm not going to forget to add done to our it function as well. So there's my done. Okay, so let's save this and see how we're doing. So flip over to my test. Yep, looks great. Everything's green. Let's try playing around with it a little bit. So I could increment by 10 instead. And okay, now I get a failure. Let's update the assertion and say, okay, well now post count should be 10. And fantastic. So now I've got 13 passing, which means that we are successfully incrementing the post count by 10. Okay, so this is our first test of operator or modify operators or update operators in Mongo. Again, increment is definitely one of the best uses for this. Certainly also set is very useful as well. The operators are best used whenever you want to avoid, or you want to have some amount of logic being sent off to Mongo, right? You want to kind of tell Mongo, hey, you need to kind of do some operation on these records. It's usually the case that we don't quite get as much leverage out of the set operator, even though I kind of mentioned it in particular. Because if we're just setting a value of a field in a document, then we might as well use the update operator, or excuse me, just the update function as we saw earlier. So set just updates the value of a field, which is 100% equivalent to what we're doing right here, where we're setting a name of Alex, right? We're like saying just without any logic or any introspection of the current value, just update Alex, or just update the name to Alex. So it usually ends up being the case that increment and multiply as well are a little bit more useful as far as these operators go, but there are some times where you might want to actually check a couple of these other ones as well. Okay, so that's our update modifiers. We'll certainly see them again later on. Let's take a quick break and then move on to our next topic in the next section.